is completely opposite in quality to material nature. Superior and inferior nature are explained in the 7th chapter. Once again, let's repeat the translation. Yet there is another unmanifest nature which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and is never annihilated. When all in this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. So, we are in this section of the Bhagavad Gita, which is entitled as Attaining the Supreme. So, this particular verse is a transitional verse from the section where Krishna talked about bhakti. In this particular chapter, if you look at, for example, the verse number 14, Krishna says, Ananya Chetaha Satatam. So, one who is Ananya in his consciousness, who is undivided in his attention towards me, he will easily attain me. After that, Krishna goes into explaining the motivation for understanding or motivation for actually doing that Ananya Bhakti. And Krishna actually goes into the details of Brahma's creation, how long Brahma lives, and how it compares to our human earthly lifespan. And Krishna then fast forwards. So in today's verse, what we are seeing here, he's taking us one step ahead to say, okay, we talked about Brahmaloka, and Brahmaloka is also very temporary. But then I have a nature, my nature or my abode is something which is beyond all of this. So he's saying that. So whatever I told you in verse number 14, the motivation for doing that is actually that there is another nature of mind. Paras tasmatu bhavonyo vyakto avyaktat sanatana. So there is vyakta and avyakta. In matter itself, there is vyakta and avyakta. So vyakta means that which is manifested, like what we can see, and feel and touch. But there is also avyakta. Avyakta means unmanifested, like the mind. So that is also something which is beyond our control per se. But Krishna is categorizing that as avyakta here, and he's saying my domain, my abode, paras tasmatu bhavonyo, my nature is transcendental and beyond both of these. That means it is beyond matter itself. And then he says that he doesn't just stop at that. He says that it is supreme and is never annihilated. So generally speaking, in this world, if you see, there are many people who who are inclined towards spirituality, but then they tend to think that the mind is something spiritual. So the moment you start talking about how to control the mind, or how to you go into talking about mindfulness, then people start thinking, wow, it is already spiritual now. But actually, mindfulness or the mind itself is not really spiritual. The mind is material. Prabhupada defines it, and Krishna himself says in the 7th chapter, and Prabhupada is explaining that in this purport, like he says, superior and inferior nature are explained in the 7th chapter, right? So in 7.13, Krishna says, Bhumi apo analo vayu kham mano buddhirevacha ahankara iti yamme bhinna prakriti dashtara. So it says I have these 8 differentiated energies, and of that there are 5 gross and there are 3 subtle. That is, 3 subtle includes the mind. So the mind is basically a subtle material energy. It is not spiritual. And that's why Krishna is emphasizing here that he is beyond the mind. He is beyond both the gross and the subtle matter. Right? And Krishna also makes it very clear that his abode is not annihilated. Because this is again something which is people fall into this trap of thinking there is the notion of antimatter even among the scientific community. So, but according to them, antimatter is opposed to matter, but according to the scientific understanding, when this matter and antimatter combines, there's going to be destruction. That's their notion of it. So matter plus antimatter is equal to destruction. But then here Krishna is saying, no, my abode is antimatter, it's anti-material, it's transcendental to both matter and manifested and unmanifested, but it's never destroyed. So this is the promise which Krishna is giving us in this verse. So unlike what the scientists would have us believe, Krishna is telling that abode or that nature of his which is transcendental is never destroyed. So that's a very hope-giving hope-giving verse here which Krishna is giving us, because normally in this world we don't see anything like that, which is guaranteed not to be destroyed. So interestingly, even in the 7th chapter, after talking about this Bhumi Rapo Analo Vayu, Krishna actually talks about Apareyam Itastvanyam Prakritim Viddhime Param Jivabhutam Mahabaho Yayedam Dharite Jagat. So he says there is another nature which is superior to this inferior material nature. What does it comprise of? It comprises of all of us, the living entities, and they are trying to exploit the inferior material energy, right? But there he did not talk about the indestructibility or the eternal nature. He did talk about transcendental nature, Apareyam Itastvanyam, but he didn't talk about the indestructibility there. Here he is very clearly saying it is indestructible and it is unmanifested, right? So this is something which is Krishna is taking Arjuna one step ahead. So it's interesting to actually note how the sequence of thought, or the sequence of verses through which Krishna is taking Arjuna from 6th to 7th to 8th chapter. So let's just briefly now recap what exactly led to this verse, and then we will delve into some of the nuances surrounding this verse, earlier and later verses of this. So if you remember, in the 6th chapter, Krishna, 6th chapter is entitled as Dhyana Yoga. So it is the focus of the 6th chapter is basically yes, Prabhu will come to this slightly later. Yeah, maybe you can put it on hold for a few minutes. So in the 6th chapter, Krishna was telling Arjuna about Ashtanga Yoga. So if you read the first few verses of the 6th chapter, Krishna is telling how a yogi should sit. He should lay on the kusha grass, and he should have his neck and his head erect, focus on the tip of the nose, and he should follow brahmacharya, and so many instructions are given there, how which direction to face. And Arjuna, after hearing all this, he goes what's the word for it? He goes a bit in 6.33, Arjuna expresses his frustration in one sense. Arjuna says, Yoyam yogas tvaya proktaha samyena madhusudana etasyaham na pashyami chanchalatvam sthitim sthiram. He says that whatever you have described to me is impractical and inendurable. He uses these two adjectives. Impractical, it's not for me, and unendurable. Unendurable means even if I do it, I cannot sustain myself. I cannot continue this kind of focusing on the tip of the nose and sitting on a deer skin for very long. And this is Arjuna 5,000 years ago. And then Arjuna follows it up by saying that famous verse 6.34, Chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramati balabhadra. It is my mind is just berserk. It's like mad. Right? He uses these 4 adjectives like chanchala, restless, turbulent, obstinate, right? And he says that it's more difficult to control than the wind. And then Krishna immediately jumps in and he gives an answer. What is Krishna's answer? Just like a teacher tells a student, don't worry, maybe I told you so many things, but it is not too difficult, right? Because sometimes the student gets despondent, depressed. So Krishna immediately says, actually, Krishna is such an amazing teacher. The teacher's role is not just to, comfort the student. First, the teacher has to agree with the student. Yes, I know it's difficult, right? And Krishna does that. How does Krishna do it? He says, what is that verse? How does that begin? Asamshayam mahabaho mano nigraham chalam. So he agreed already. Asamshayam, no doubt, Arjuna, whatever you said is correct. Your mind is very difficult. Mahabaho, he's saying, yes, you're a great, warrior, but Asamshayam, it's undoubtedly difficult to control the mind. Mano durnigraham chalam, abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena tu vidyate. Then he gives the solution also. But it's possible, don't worry. First he agrees with Arjuna and then he says, don't worry, it's possible. What is the solution? Abhyasa and vairagya. So you have to practice, detachment. So practice and detachment have to go together basically. And then Krishna follows it up by saying, asamyatatmanu yogo dushprapa iti me mati. For one whose mind is unbridled, self-realization is difficult work. It's not going to be easy. And then he says, but don't worry, if you endeavor by practical means, then you will be guaranteed success. So this part of it, if you look at how Krishna responds to Arjuna, it's very beautiful, and it's giving confidence to Arjuna and even to all of us. But after this, immediately then Arjuna goes into another set of questions from 6.37 onwards. Then Arjuna starts asking, Ayati Shraddhayo Peto Yoga Chaliti Manasa. So what happens to the unsuccessful transcendentalist? What is his destination, Krishna? Okay, fine. Okay, for somebody who's starting off, Abhyasa and Vairagya is okay. But what about somebody who lives in between? And then Krishna answers that question very beautifully by saying, Partha Naive Namutra, Vinasha Daiva, Vinashastasya Vidyate, Nahi Kalyana Krit Kaschit Durgatim Tatagati. That means a transcendentalist engaged in auspicious activities never meets with destruction. And one who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. So Krishna is again giving, Arjuna the hope that even if somebody fails in between, don't worry, he will be taken care of. And then Krishna follows that up with 4 more beautiful verses where he says, that someone Suchinam Srimatam Gehe, even if the unsuccessful yogi goes to the heavenly planets, comes back, takes birth in pious family or in a rich family or in a family of transcendentalists. And Prabhupada says, that we were fortunate. He talks about himself very humbly and he says, I was fortunate enough to take birth in such a family. And then Prabhupada says, that series of verses which says that by dint of the practice of yoga, that such an unsuccessful yogi will automatically be attracted to the yogic principles. And then after that, Krishna concludes that beautiful chapter by, taking Arjuna to the point of saying who is that topmost yogi, right? So yoginam api sarvesham madgate nantaratma shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yukta tamo matah. One who is, the one who is intimately united with me in faith, such a person is the topmost yogi. So this, so Krishna is taking Arjuna through this series of, beginning with Ashtanga Yoga, and then Arjuna says, not possible. Krishna says, don't worry, this is the solution. And then Krishna concludes by saying, bhakti, faith and leading to bhakti is what is the solution, right? So faith is something which is so integral to our, bhakti that it cannot be overstressed. So I was hearing his grace Mahatma Prabhu. So Mahatma Prabhu gives this beautiful japa seminars, and he was saying that faith means we are on the top of a mountain and Krishna says jump, and Krishna says you jump and the net will come, the net will appear, and that's faith. And he said, but we always say no, first show me the net, then I will jump. So there is a vast difference between, of course, when actually the situation is there, it's not going to be easy. It's easy to sit here and say that, but that's the kind of faith which Krishna is talking about in 6.47. And then Krishna seamlessly transitions to the 7th chapter where he says, now he starts going in-depth into the bhakti aspect, which he explained. He concluded 6th chapter. He starts off by saying, Maya Sakta Manapartha. Remember me, with mind attached to me. Now you hear how, by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, you can know about me completely. So in this way, then Krishna starts telling more about himself directly. So you can see this word Mai coming in again and again in the 7th chapter. Whereas earlier on in the 6th chapter, it was more indirect. Right? I mean, there was some hints, some pointers towards bhakti, but there was no a very a concrete conclusion that yes, I am the object of that bhakti. Krishna didn't say that very conclusively till now. He said, Yomam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pashyati, tasyaham na pranashyami, sacha me na pranashyati. So, one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me is never lost to me, I am never lost to him. So those kind of verses are there throughout from 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. But the real conclusion is now coming in this part, because this, as you all know, is the Bhakti Yoga section of the Bhagavad Gita. Then through the 7th chapter, Krishna is taking us through this whole journey of why knowledge about him is so rare, so special, and then he talks about how he is there, all pervading, Mattat Parataram Nanyat Kinchidasti Taranjaya, and then he says how it is Bahunam Janmanam Ante Gyanam, after many births one will know me in full. He talks about different types of surrender, those who don't surrender to me, Namam Dushtutino Muda. Then he talks about people who surrender to him but through demigods, through impersonal approach, and different Krishnetara. Krishnetara means Krishna Itara. They want Krishna indirectly. And then he basically takes us through that journey, and towards the end of 7th chapter, he concludes where he began. So 7.1 and 7.30, if you look at, they're actually pretty much like, it's like one full cycle is completed. Because in 7.30, Krishna actually says, I am the Adi Yajna, Adi Bhuta, Adi Daiva. I am the source, I am the origin of all the yajnas, I am the enjoyer of all the yajnas, I am the source of all the devatas, and I am also the source of material nature. And he says, one who knows this will prayana kalecha, he will, at the time of death, he will be able to remember me. So if you look at the 7th chapter, it ended by saying that one who knows Krishna to be Adi Daiva, Adi Yajna and Adi Bhuta, he will be able to leave the body by remembering Krishna. Now the 8th chapter, so when it begins, actually the 8th chapter, in the 8th chapter, there is this very interesting, again we are doing a recap here, but I just wanted to make sure that we are in touch with the with what's happening, so that we don't just see our today's verse in isolation. So there is a connection to the beautiful verses in the last chapter and the 6th chapter. So in the 8th chapter, now Arjuna begins by asking 7 different questions to Krishna, and I think we have discussed that, so I'm not going to the details. But essentially, Arjuna asks Krishna, questions about what is Brahman, and what is fruitive activities, what is material manifestation, what are the demigods, what is sacrifice. So because Krishna ended with this, right? Adi Yadya, Adi Deva, Adi Bhuta, he asks what is that. And then Arjuna asks a very beautiful question in the 2nd verse. He says, how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? So this is the driving force for the remaining part of the 8th chapter. What is that? The answer to this question. How can those engaged in bhakti remember you at the time of death? Right? Again, you see the point of remembrance is coming here. Remembrance. We ended with remembrance, now again remembrance is coming. And then Krishna goes into answering the first 6 questions in 2 verses, the 3rd and 4th verse, and 5th verse of the 8th chapter. He starts off with the answer to the last but the most important question, which is how to remember Krishna at the time of death. And Krishna then goes into a long, in fact the entire 8th chapter actually is a kind of answer it's not a very direct answer, but Krishna is taking Arjuna through this different paths to give him this one answer, how do you remember me at the time of death? So in verses 9 to 13, Krishna talked about Yoga Mishra Bhakti, remembering Krishna through Yoga Mishra Bhakti. That is basically not pure Bhakti, but mixed with the notion of yoga. Then in the verse number 14, which actually we can go to now, Prabhu, if you could just display that verse, 8.1, because this is a very important verse, which is actually a pivotal verse in this chapter, because after this, Krishna, is taking Arjuna through this beautiful path of bhakti. So, Ananya Chetaha Satatam Yomam Smarati Nityasaha Tasyaham Sulabha Parthaha Nitya Yuktasya Yoginaha. For one who always remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Pritha, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. Right? So, this word Sulabha, actually I heard, I think, where did I hear? I heard that this is the only verse in Bhagavad Gita which has the word Sulabha. So, it's very interesting. Tasyaham Sulabha Partha Nitya Yuktasya Yoginaha. So, for whom it is easy, for one who remembers me without deviation, I am very easy to obtain. So, actually in the 6th chapter, when Krishna is speaking about Ashtanga Yoga and Arjuna is saying it's too difficult, Prabhupada, even at that point, Prabhupada says, that actually, this is not for Arjuna, not to speak of Kali Yuga people. So Prabhupada's, amazing purports are such that he takes the conclusion and, keeps giving them right from the beginning. So the medicine has to go in. Anybody reads any part of the Gita. So even there, Prabhupada says, yes, bhakti is the easy way. But then there are some commentators who disagree and they say, no, Krishna never went against Ashtanga Yoga. He never said that Ashtanga Yoga is, not a right path. And that is true, yes. Krishna did not say that explicitly, or he did not, in fact, he just told Arjuna that, yes, Abhyasena Kaunta, you must practice, then you will achieve success. It may be difficult. So why Krishna did not, condemn or, minimize Ashtanga Yoga, he also clearly did not endorse it. He did not endorse and say, this is the path, like how he's saying here. Here, Krishna is very clearly saying it is Sulabha, but he never said that about Ashtanga Yoga. There is no such verse. So this kind of clearly shows that, Krishna is although, his answers to Arjuna are not immediate in that sense. Like Arjuna asked the question in 6th chapter, but Krishna took, he went through 7th chapter, he went through, and then, in this particular verse, he's saying very clearly that, it is easy if you practice bhakti. So this is something which we have to understand, very clearly, that that long path of Ashtanga Yoga is not an easy path, because there, first we have to restrain the senses, and then we have to start probing where to engage our senses, so that the process of saying no is a very, very painful process. Like if somebody says to us that don't think of a blue monkey with a red tail, and then immediately we are like, wow, does it even exist? And we actually start thinking of it. But then that's the nature of the mind, right? But if you directly give engagements, then the mind is engaged in Krishna's service. So rather than saying no and going through the long process, Krishna is saying this is easy. Tasyaham sulabha partha nitya yukta sriyoginaha. And if you actually see in this particular verse, Prabhupada very beautifully explains. Like if you go to the I think in the I think this is the second verse, second paragraph, last part of it, Prabhu. If you can go, I didn't put it here maybe. Did I? Oh yeah, the second paragraph, the last one. So Prabhupada says, as stated in the Vedas, Katha Upanishad, Yam evaisha vrinutena labhyas tasyeva atma vivrudute tanum swam. One who is fully surrendered and engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Lord can understand the Supreme Lord as He is. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 10.10, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, the Lord gives such a devotee sufficient intelligence, so that ultimately the devotee can attain Him in his spiritual game. So the other beautiful point which Prabhupada is, Jai Shri Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Ananda Koti Vaishnava ki Jai. So the other point which Prabhupada is making here is also very important, in that it's not just that bhakti is sulabha, but bhakti is also guided by Krishna personally. So it's not that we are left alone. Whereas in the other paths, Ashtanga Yoga or for that matter Jnana Yoga, it's on the practitioner. The practitioner has to find out, it's ascending path. You have to say no, and you have to go on, find out by yourself, what to do. Something like doing a, PhD. So you have to find out this is not right, this is not right, this is right, and you have to take the pain of going to all the way, finding something. But in the case of Bhakti, Krishna is saying, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, I will give the intelligence. So there is a twofold benefit by practicing Bhakti. One is it is Sulabha, and second is Krishna is there to personally help, those who are sincere. But as Prabhupada is saying, it is not that, Krishna will just, Krishna will help, but to what extent? He is reciprocal, right? He is, as we say that famous verse, Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajami, mama vatmano anuvartante manushya partha sarvasa. So Krishna is not arbitrarily partial, that as Hiranyakashipu thought, he just chooses somebody to be nice to and chooses somebody not to be nice to. Of course, that is his discretion. He is the supreme, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, transcendental autocrat. Krishna is that transcendental autocrat, but still his choice is guided by the sincerity of the devotee. So basically this verse, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, what it says is, clear intelligence comes from sincerity. Clear intelligence comes from sincerity of the devotee, because when we are trying our best, Krishna is there to give the intelligence. So therefore, this bhakti path is what is the way to go, as Krishna is very beautifully telling here. And then now after this verse, in the next two verses, Krishna then talks about the motivation for actually doing what he said here, Ananya Chedata Satnam. To be that unmotivated, unalloyed devotee, what is the motivation? Of course, now the moment you say unmotivated, then where is the question of motivation? You may say, but still, Krishna knows that for all of us, we can't work without motivation so easily. So at least there has to be something told, and it's a fact. He's not making up anything here. So Krishna is saying then about these two verses about Dukkhalayam Shashvatam. So immediately Krishna comes to the point and says, okay, in this world you can't get this, you can't get the reward which you're looking for, because it is Dukkhalayam Shashvatam, and Krishna doesn't make a big deal about it, and that's not the focus. It's a very passing mention, in the sense Dukkhalayam Shashvatam. So therefore he says Napnavanti Mahatmanas Samsiddhim Paramam. Therefore the intelligent people, the Mahatmas, they never focus on being here in this world. Right? So immediately Krishna then, he talks about both, right? Like the nature of this world and the nature of the Mahatmas. And then immediately then Krishna follows up by saying, Brahma Bhuvana Loka Punaravartino Arjuna. Right from top to the bottom, everybody is miserable. Everywhere there is birth and death. Mamupete Konte Punarjanmana Vidite. But he says, if you come to me, then you won't have to suffer anymore. Because no more birth and no more death. So in this way, Krishna is actually, it's like, a doctor, when he's telling a patient that you take this medicine, you will go out of the hospital, right? So he has to encourage the patient. But the patient, if the patient is, sane, then he will automatically understand hospital is not a good place. The doctor doesn't have to say it. It's already a painful place. right? Or the jail superintendent doesn't have to tell the people in the jail that, someday you will get out. No, they want to get out. Of course, there are some people who may not, like Kali Yuga people, all of, the Kali Yuga people especially, we don't even want to get out. We are so happily in the lap of illusion that we actually think it's all nice. Right? So Dukkhalaya Ashashvatam is also a big point to be convinced for today's, even the so-called intelligentsia of today, because they don't really accept that or even believe in that. Anyway, then after that, Krishna goes into explaining about Brahma's day and night to make it more concrete why this place is Dukkhalaya Ashashvatam. Right? Detailed, in about 3 verses, Krishna starts saying that this Bhuta Grama Sevaya Bhutva Bhutva Praniyate. Ratragame Vashapartha Prabhavati Aharagame, text number 19. Krishna says when Brahma's day arrives, all living entities come into being, and then at the night they're helplessly annihilated. So here again, you see this this notion of cyclic time, very very beautifully being explained by Krishna. And all of this is contributing to his motivating answer, right? That he wants to say that there is a reward much greater, right? In order to make that rewards really meaningful, you have to first show that what you get here is not so great, because for us, unfortunately, we don't have experience or we don't remember about that world which he's talking about. So we have to start from this world. So now Krishna is detailed going about the best thing in this world, right? So somebody will say, okay, in this world things are not good, I will go to Brahmaloka. Like Prabhupada explains, there is something called Panchagni Yajna. If you do Panchagni Yajna, you can go to Brahmaloka. But then Prabhupada says even Brahma has to, Brahma will also be finished. The lifespan of the universe is the same as the life of Brahma. So when Brahma is finished, then some people, even Brahma can go back to Godhead from there. But Prabhupada is making the point, it's not permanent. And then, so essentially this few verses is talking about the cyclic nature of time. So this is something which I wanted to discuss in a little bit of detail. So Prabhu, if you could go to the PowerPoint. So generally speaking, in the Abrahamic traditions, in the religions originated, in Bethlehem or in the Western religions, they have this linear concept of time. So they believe that everything begins at birth, and basically it ends at death, and there's eternal salvation. So according to them, karma is eternal. So if you believe in whatever their version of religion and God, then you get the benefit. Otherwise, forever you go to hell. If you do get salvation, then also it's forever. So basically, their notion of karma or this salvation, it all falls in this between 2 points. You draw a line between 2 points, and you say that's it. From here to here, I lived, and then I went up or I went down, and I don't care. I don't even know I don't even believe that anything else can happen. But as opposed to this, the cyclic notion of time is what Lord Krishna is talking about here. That is what you can say, like at the very heart of our Sanatana Dharma. It is I would say, like it can be thought of as the thing which drives our culture, our thought process, our lifestyle, our outlook to life itself. So this is very interesting to note that when sometimes we think that philosophy is something which is for the philosophers. Philosophy is for whatever intelligent people. Philosophy is not for me. For me, I have all the other things. I will only focus on cultural activities. But no, philosophy drives society. We may not be philosophical, but like it or not, the society is driven by philosophy. So, for example, this cyclic versus linear, notion of time, of course, only one of it can be true. But depending on which one the society is driven by, it will go in completely different directions. Why? For example, if I believe in a linear notion of time, that means there is nothing which repeats. After destruction, there is just basically just eternal salvation or condemnation. So if I believe in that, if I'm guided by that as my principle of life, then obviously then I don't have to worry about destruction per se. So then I'm motivated to keep making changes, innovations, and being creative and whatnot. Like we see in the world today, the whole goal is to let's make things better, right? Let's make things better. And there's no end to it, right? We were talking about it 100 years back. We are talking about it even today, and there is no end to it. 100 years back, we were talking about let's eliminate poverty, and let's let's introduce technology, let's have faster communication and transport. And today we are talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning. We're talking about it taking away our jobs. At the end of the day, constant change has become like the only thing which is constant in our lives. But if someone believes in the cyclic notion of life, it completely changes the dimension of thinking, because the moment we know that there is going to be destruction, and after destruction there is again creation, automatically that induces a sense of detachment. And this is what we see in our Vedic culture actually, that the society was geared for self-realization while taking care of the immediate needs to the extent it should be. Like Prabhupada always says, right, that the purpose of the Krishna consciousness movement is to basically engage all the devotees to free up their time so that they can be engaged in Krishna service. That's the whole point, right? We want time to be engaged in self-realization. But unfortunately, that idea is not so strongly rooted in the linear, this linear concept of time. Whereas when it's cyclic, then you immediately know, oh well, stability is more important than all these, changes, innovations, and keep on changing things. So that's why in our Vedic culture, it's not that people did not have the intelligence to be creative or innovative. It's just that it wasn't considered very important, because they were looking at it as the long, the bigger picture. They were looking at it as, oh, fine, all this is fine, but is it helping me towards achieving that goal? That was the question which was always asked. So you see, this one difference between, this philosophical understanding, you might say, leads to a huge difference in the outlook towards life. So in the next slide, I've just briefly put in, Prabhu, so you can see, for example, life around us is always, not always, but you can see so many things cyclic, right? Seasons are cyclic, day and night is cyclic, right? Like our birth and death, birth, old age, disease, death, as we know, is cyclic. And many things. The moon is cyclic in nature. So when we see the world around us, we see that this cyclic nature is continuously being, it's something which hits us. And it's quite natural to also think that, life itself is cyclic. But one thing to be noted, it's not that the people who believe in the linear concept are, okay, they may have an incomplete understanding, but they choose to focus on only that part, because they feel anyway it's going to repeat, no? So if it's going to repeat, then it's boring. It's the same thing which is going to happen again. So I better only look at, these 4 seasons. If it repeats, it repeats, but I will focus on these 4 seasons. So that's their worldview, which is okay, which is the view they have. But for us, if you want a complete worldview, then this is what Krishna is telling us. That's what he's saying, that Ratragame, Vasatpartha Prabhavanti Aharagame. So the moment night comes of Brahma, we are all helplessly annihilated. The moment day comes, again we are created. So in this way, this cyclic notion, so we could go to the next slide, it induces a few things. So I just put in, you can go to the next Prabhu. Yeah. So for example, one of the things which I mentioned here is the detachment, from the temporary, right, and the attachment to the eternal. So this is something which immediately is evident, the moment you have this cyclic notion. And the second thing over here is that stability, which we already talked about, right? The stability, the focus on the stability more than the innovation. And the last thing is peaceful society. Now I have a few examples ahead. Can you go ahead, Prabhu? Yeah. So now, while focusing on this larger picture, it is also important that we don't forget the smaller picture. In the sense that, sometimes we may become indifferent to people, relationships, to our body in the name of being transcendental. That is also something which can be detrimental, right? Like, as someone said, like, we are not the body, but we are in the body. So we have to take care of the body. And that is why it's important that while trying to practice Krishna consciousness, which is transcendental, we don't forget, to live or leave a legacy in this world in terms of, our behavior, in terms of how we deal with people, whether it's our family, whether it is with devotees, whether it's with the outside world, and in terms of our profession, in terms of all the interactions we have with the world, we have to make sure that we don't minimize that, or we don't underperform just because we assume ourselves to be transcendental. So there are beautiful examples from the Chaitanya Charitamrita over here. If you go to the next slide, Prabhu, you will see there. I put in a few examples. One was of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami himself, right? We all know this beautiful story that Raghunath Das Goswami wanted to leave his home. He was a millionaire's son, and it is said that his father used to, I think the income was something like 12,000 gold coins in a month. And such a rich, son, he wanted to leave everything and join Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tells him that, don't do this Markat Vairagya. We don't want this monkey renunciation. Right? So monkeys are, they seem to be renounced. They don't wear clothes or, they're only living on trees. But are they actually renounced? No, they are not. They are not renounced. So Mahaprabhu told him, don't do this Markat Vairagya, go home. When the right time comes, everything will be arranged. And that's what happened, right? Later on, Nityananda Prabhu blessed Raghunath Das Goswami at the Panihati festival, and kept this lotus feet on his head, and then Raghunath Das Goswami was able to run away or renounce his the attachments. In fact, he was married to it is said, a wife who was as beautiful as an Apsara, and he had so much money, but he gave up everything to come to Jagannath Puri. But it was not immediate. It was not just cutting it like in a way that which made society disrupted. So we have to make sure that while being transcendental, we also don't disrupt the existing norms in the society, which is what is defined by, for example, the Varnashrama. So there is Daivi Varnashram, there is Varnashram. Both are important. While we want Daivi Varnashram, it is also important to have Varnashram, and that's why even in our society, in ISKCON, we have the Varnashrama ministry, which is trying to develop, which was Prabhupada's dream as well, that the remaining 50% of his mission will be focused on Varnashrama. So while trying to transcend, we also have to be respectful to the norms of this world, which is by following Varnashrama. Another example, if you go to the next slide, Prabhu, is of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So Gopal Bhatta Goswami, So Gopal Bhatta Goswami was the son of Venkata Bhatta, and he was in Srirangam and he saw Mahaprabhu in his own house, and he wanted to renounce. He actually wanted to run away with Mahaprabhu at that small age, and Mahaprabhu tells him, no, you must take care of your parents. Of course, his parents were pure devotees, and he said, you must take care, be with them. And then later on, when they passed on from this world, he joins Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Another beautiful example, you can go ahead, Prabhu, is of Kurma Brahmana. So this is the beautiful picture you see. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, while he was on his South Indian Yatra, he came to this Kurma Kshetra. I don't know if any of you have been there. It's a beautiful place. And so in this particular village, there was this Kurma Brahmana. And he invited Mahaprabhu home, he washed his feet, he fed him prasadam, and after doing all this, then when Mahaprabhu was leaving, he spoke a beautiful verse. Let's see what he says. Prabhu can go to the next slide. So he says, Kripakara Prabhu more yato ma sange sahite na pari dukha vishaya tarange. The Brahmana begged Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, my dear Lord, kindly show me favor and let me go with you. I can no longer tolerate the waves of misery caused by materialistic life. So he immediately wanted to, leave his family and basically proceed with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as a renunciant. And of course, Prabhupada in the purport he says, in the initial part of the purport he says that he was very prosperous, this Kurma Brahmana, it appears, that's why he wanted to renounce. But towards the end of the purport, Prabhupada says, according to the Vedic way of civilization, one should leave his family after attaining 50 years of age and go to the forest of Vrindavan to devote the rest of his life in the service of the Lord. Now immediately Chaitanya Mahaprabhu responds by a beautiful verse. You can go to the next verse, Prabhu. I'm not sure if the font is small, I'm sorry. But anyway, I will read it out. Prabhu kahe aiche baat kabhu na kahiba grihe rahi Krishna nama nirantara laiba. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied, don't speak like that again. Better to remain at home and chant the holy name of Krishna always. It was almost like a chastisement. Don't speak like that. And in the purport, Prabhupada is giving a beautiful purport. He said, it is not advisable in this age of Kali to leave one's family suddenly, for people are not trained as proper brahmacharis and grihasthas. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised the Brahmana not to be too eager to give up family life. It would be better to remain with his family and try to become purified by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra regularly under the direction of a spiritual master. This is the instruction of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If this principle is followed by everyone, there is no need to accept sannyas. In the next verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advises everyone to become an ideal householder by offenselessly chanting the Hare Krishna mantra and teaching the same principle to everyone he meets. So this is that section of the the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Leela, where all these beautiful instructions are being given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Right? So he's saying that Prabhupada is saying there is no need to leave family suddenly. Right? It is not one, as that verse goes, Jnane prayasam udapasiyam. namantameva jivanti sanmukharitam bhavadiyavartam sthane sthitam shrutigataam tanuvan. Wherever we are, as long as we are receptive, orally to the message of the Lord and His devotees, that will be enough. Yap prayaso jidajito apitarestu lokim. You can conquer the unconquerable Krishna by staying at home but being receptive to the message of the Lord. So in this way, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through Kurma Brahmana, through Jiva Goswami, to Raghunath Das Goswami, through Gopal Bhatta Goswami, he is teaching us that it is, the detachment has to be organic, in the sense that even we want to be transcendental, we have to respect the laws of this world. Like in the immediate next verse, that famous verse, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Jarede kitare kahe Krishna upadesha, amaragnya guru haya tarai desha. Instruct everyone to follow the orders of Lord Krishna as they are given in the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. In this way, become a spiritual master and try to liberate everyone in this land. And again, Prabhupada in the purport says, this is the sublime mission of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Many people come and inquire whether they have to give up family life to join the society, but that is not our mission. One can remain comfortably in residence. We simply request everyone to chant the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, in this way, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu demonstrated through his devotees and through his own life that we don't need to be artificially, giving up, the externals. We need to be internally renounced, detached, but externally we need to be in this world, in our particular position, whatever has been given to us as per Varna and Ashrama. In fact, if you look at the life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he was so careful with respect to following the Varnashrama Dharma. For example, when his first wife passed away, Srimati Vishnupriya Devi, Lakshmi Priya Devi, sorry. So at that time, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was, basically very young. Like maybe he got, I think it was Chaitanya Charitamrita says 14 years when he was married. So at that time, he was 16 or 17 years old. At that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu thinks, I am a grihastha. I'm married. My wife has passed away, but I cannot remain like this. My ashrama, the grihastha ashrama dictates that I have to be married. And he decides to get married. And we all know that, he was married to Srimati Vishnupriya Devi, and essentially he demonstrated that, that he followed that, ashrama dharma. Later on, when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in Tota Gopinath, in Jagannath Puri, at that time, it is said that there was this one lady who was singing the Gita Govinda. All of you know the Gita Govinda is a beautiful, very, very sweet rendition by Jayadeva Goswami, 24 verses glorifying the Supreme Lord. And this lady was singing in a very special tune. That tune was so mesmerizing. It is called, I think, the Gujjar Raga, they call it. Gujjar. I don't know how to sing it, but I think you can hear online. There are so many, tunes on the Gita Govinda. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it is said, became so intoxicated when he heard this Gita Govinda. He started running. He just forgot everything that, where he was. He was a sannyasi and he was, he had some dharmas to follow. He just started running towards that sound, wherever it was coming from. This lady was singing, to embrace that person, whoever was singing. And it is said that Govinda was running behind Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu, please, this is, he wanted to convey the message that, because Mahaprabhu was in his bhava, the Mahabhav of the spiritual world. So it is said, just before he reached that lady, Govinda somehow falls at the feet of Mahaprabhu and says, Mahaprabhu, this is a lady, please, this is a lady. And then immediately comes back to external consciousness and he tells Govinda, you saved my life. Because he said, if I would have, by mistake, if I would have touched this lady, I would have had to come and take my life. Mahaprabhu says that. He says, I would have to take my life. Now imagine somebody who is so completely absorbed in the Mahabhav, he's saying, that Mahabhav, if that would have led me to violate my ashrama dharma as a sannyasi, touching a woman, it's prohibited. If I would have done that, even that Mahabhav could not have saved my life. In that sense, Mahaprabhu is setting the example for us, what, the kind of strictness he had. And another time it is said that there was this Parameshwar Prabhu, one of the devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who came to Jagannath Puri, and he said, he introduced himself, he came from Bengal, and then, as it was the culture, and he said, this is my wife, so he introduced, but he didn't say that, this is the name by name. In those days, the culture was, he'll say, this is Mukundera Mata. So he says, this is Mukundera Mata. Son's name was Mukundera Mata. But immediately Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he feels a little embarrassed. He says, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu feels that I am a sannyasi. Why is he introducing, by name, by his wife to me? Of course, now in those days you have to understand the society was extremely conservative. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did conform to the norms of that conservative society. He did not, in the name of being transcendental, disrupt those norms. So that's the point we're trying to understand. But later on, the same Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, while talking to Ramananda Rai on the banks of the river Godavari at Kuvur, he there asks Ramananda Rai, tell me Ramananda, what is the highest goal of life? And then Ramananda starts, by talking about different Varnashrama Acharate. Varnashrama is the topmost dharma. He says, no, eho bahya, or aage kaho aar. This is superficial. See, the same Mahaprabhu told Ramananda Rai, this Varnashrama is superficial. And then Ramananda Rai then goes on to say, yad karoshi yadasnasi, that verse from the Bhagavad Gita. That is superior to Varnashrama Acharate. Like, you should give everything for Krishna, you should do everything for Krishna. Then he says, no, that's also not sufficient. Then Ramananda Rai goes to, Sarva Dharman Parityaja. He says, that is also not enough. Then he goes to Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. That's also not sufficient. And finally, Ramananda Rai comes to this verse, which I just quoted, Jnane Prayasa Mudapasanamantaveva. Wherever you are, stay at home, Sthane Sthita Sudikatam Tanuman. At that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu starts accepting. Yes, now you are coming to the point. And then from there, all the way up to the gopis' love for Krishna, the conversation proceeds. But the point is, the same Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who followed the Varnashrama so perfectly is saying here that it is not as important as, the higher principles of devotional service. So therefore, even to say that Varnashrama is not as important, one has to follow it perfectly. So it's like, to say that, sometimes in academia, like we say, without a PhD, you cannot become a professor. PhD is very much, it's necessary. But sometimes people say, what is all this PhD? It's all useless. But to say that one needs to be a PhD. That's the point. So if without being a PhD, we cannot say you don't need a PhD because we don't know what has happened in that process. It's like if a drunkard comes and says, what is all this getting up in the morning? As if you will go back to Krishna by getting up in the morning. Then it's of course, just by getting up early in the morning, that may not, that's not the criteria for going back to Krishna. But who is saying it? That matters. That makes a big difference. But drunkard is saying it makes no sense. So in this way, we see that, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he made sure that while we are talking about the highest truth, we do not compromise on, not disrupting the norms of this world. We have to be careful. And we have seen in the history of our own Krishna conscious society that so many times devotees have, in the beginning days especially, we have been a bit, maybe in the name of being transcendental, neglectful of family or neglectful of the norms of society. It has led to huge issues later on for us as a society. And, that's something which we all have learned from and we are learning from. So therefore, today our society as well, devotee care is such an important integral part of our society. It is not just any longer, it's being so beautifully carried forward by the GBC and by so many very elevated devotees who know how not just we are making more devotees, but we want to make happier devotees by caring for devotees holistically. Not just talking about just chanting 16 rounds, following regular principles and spiritual world, but in this world whatever is needed to make a devotee's life happy, which could be as maybe apparently material, like getting a job for a devotee, or maybe helping a devotee's child get married or whatever. These all these things need to be set up holistically so that the devotee can focus on Krishna, and that is what we learn from this particular verse as well. So basically, in conclusion, so let's go to the next this one, Prabhu. So basically, some of the take-home points which I thought we could take from today's discussion is, first of all, that bhakti is easy and more natural than other paths. So that is very important to understand. Of course, Prabhupada said bhakti is easy. Prabhupada said bhakti is simple but not easy in that sense, because it is easy for those who are simple, but if we have a complicated mind, bhakti can be also very, very complicated. because Krishna reveals himself accordingly. If we approach Krishna with a complicated mind, Krishna will he's the ultimate Jatila, Jatil, he can become Jatil to the next level. And if we approach Krishna with a simple mind, then he can be very simple also. The second thing which we learn today is that it's not just that bhakti is easy, but Krishna is helping us. You see, bhakti as a process is easy, it is more natural, undoubtedly, but Krishna is there to help us. But will Krishna help everyone? Yes, to the extent we are sincere. So that clear intelligence comes from our sincerity. So, impersonalism is a very difficult process, as Krishna himself says, Klesho adhikarastesham avyaktasakti, in 12th chapter. Or Krishna also says, I think in the 7th chapter itself, Krishna says, avyaktam vyaktimapannam manyate mam abudhaya. The unintelligent people, they like to think of me in my unmanifested form. So in this way, Krishna repeatedly in the Gita has been, condemning, or at least saying that impersonalism is very difficult. But this particular verse which we saw today, Ananya Chetaha Sadatam Yomam Smarati Nityasa Tasyaham Sulabha Partha Nityas Yogina. This Sulabha word is undisputable. If nobody can, by any stretch of imagination, no Mayavadi scholar can come and say that here, Krishna is talking about, his unmanifested form. Because Krishna is very clearly saying, Ananya Chetaha Sadatam Yomam Smarati Nityasaha. Of course, they can still misinterpret if they want to, but the point is, Krishna is very categorical here. So therefore, he is making it clear that one who is undeviated in his focus on me, it will be very easy for him. Then we also saw how the rewards from practicing devotion service is so much greater, like we saw in today's verse, right? Parastasmat bhavani. You will get a reward which is so much above even Brahma Loka. Even Brahma Loka, it is subject to destruction. Then what about, the spiritual world is way, way beyond that. And the last thing which we learned, actually we didn't see that today, but the next few verses, maybe I just give a trailer because, we don't know, maybe all of us not come every week. So, Krishna is now going to switch gears slightly after this particular verse we talked about, and Krishna is going to talk about details of how to leave the body. He's going to talk about how if you leave the body in Uttarayana, when the sun is in the northern hemisphere, you will come back to the supreme abode. Then he says, if you leave in the Shukla Paksha means the waxing moon, when the moon is rising, that time you will come back to me. So all these things Krishna says, of course, but then Prabhupada makes it very clear, you don't worry about all this. But devotee doesn't have to worry about all this. So I remember His Grace Devkinandan Prabhu mentioned that once when His Holiness Mahavishnu Goswami Maharaj was, very ill in the last few days. So at that time, Maharaj had told, the doctors that, he doesn't want any medicines. And then Prabhuji was mentioning that, Maharaj, so of course Maharaj knew very well all these, the descriptions which was given in the Bhagavad Gita, like what we see in the 8th chapter. But Maharaj said for a devotee, none of this, we should not be focusing on, making sure that we leave from the Brahmarandra, or we leave from the 7 different randras. It is said that we leave from the top part, his destination will be higher. But the devotee doesn't have to worry. Krishna anyway takes care of it. So in this way, Maharaj was trying to say that a devotee must seek the essence in everything. So this is another very important lesson which we can take from this particular chapter, because sometimes we get so much stuck in the rules and the moment, in the sense we actually bind ourselves in a loop of our own creation, and we forget the essence. And that is why Krishna is again reminding us that although all these things are being told in detail, but you don't get stuck in that, right? So Krishna is very clear, categorical, that you have to focus on the essence. And what is the essence? The essence is to serve Krishna, with remembrance, with love, lifelong, so that at that point of time, when there is, when the moment of death comes, then all that will influence us at the time of death. So therefore, we have to be careful that we don't bring in our self-created rules which we put around ourselves and lose the access to Krishna. So there has to be dadati pratigranati, guhyam akyati prachati, bhumte bhojele cheva shadvida priti lakshana. So this is the Rupa Goswami's instruction, Lokadeshamrita. It is not just, sometimes we think, oh, it's nice to give gifts to everyone. But accepting gifts is also important. If you don't accept the gift from the devotee who wants to please us, then how is that going to please that devotee? Right? So it is not just about giving gifts, it's also about accepting. Rupa Goswami is very clear. It is important, because sometimes we see, somebody may say, oh well, I don't want to accept any gift. Fine, that is a principle which we have, because then we feel I'll become obliged to the person. But in every action of ours, we have to be guided by what pleases the other person. Of course, we have to know who is on the other side. May not be with everyone, but at least with devotees who have the right intentions and motives, then we should be trying to please them rather than being happy with our own rules. Right? And I mean, we could think of many other examples here, whether it is with ourselves or dealing with devotees. We have to be very careful that we do what is necessary to remember Krishna. I just end with this beautiful example, which comes a classic example here. Again, when we are talking about this, the essence, seeking the essence. So I remember it was back in 2008, and when His Holiness Jayapataka Swami Maharaj had a stroke at that time. It was really it was a situation where the doctors, I still remember in Hinduja Hospital in Mumbai, they had actually said there's only 5% chance for survival. It was such a devastating stroke. And I remember at that time, we were in a yatra there in Pune. There was a yatra going on, and we got this news, and we were really very disturbed that how will such a Jayapataka Maharaj, such a glorious personality, personal associate of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, how can this happen to him? And then I remember we were, we all prayed for Maharaj, and then there was this discussion whether we should have a yatra that year because, Maharaj is not well. How can we go for a yatra? I mean, it's not respectful to a sannyasi and to such a great personality when we go for a yatra. And then there was a lot of discussion, a lot of churning, and then the devotees finally concluded that if we go for yatra, then how many devotees, thousands of devotees will come? The Kartik Yatra. And then there will be more opportunity to pray for Maharaj. And then actually, it so happened that in that particular yatra, there were something like 5,000 or 6,000 devotees. The whole yatra was dedicated from beginning to end, every day, every night, to the better health of His Holiness Jayapataka Swami Maharaj, and praying for him continuously. So we all became more, in that sense, remembering Maharaj. So this simple example kind of demonstrates that in every situation, if we have that desire to please the devotees, to somehow or the other please Krishna by pleasing the devotee, then Krishna gives the intelligence. Now that doesn't mean the rules are not important, but Krishna gives the intelligence when to bypass what, when we have that sincerity to please the devotee. But the intention has to be with not just for we don't do things just for keeping our moral standards, our self-created standards. We have to be in line with the parampara, and we have to please the devotees. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Gaudi Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Pitai Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bol. Vinavatsal Prabhu. Prabhu is, so yeah.